Good morning. Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. You've reached the Real Estate Fix. I'm your host, Rich Szerman, on KHTS, FM 98.1, AM 1220. Thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate it. We're going to talk about all things real estate this morning. As a matter of fact, today we have a special treat. Well, a special treat for you guys, and certainly a special treat for me, my wife, Jane. Jane Szerman, who is a real estate attorney, as those of you guys who listen to the show know. Real estate attorney extraordinaire. And so she's going to come in and answer some questions we've been getting that are legal questions that I am not allowed to answer because I am not an attorney. She likes to remind me of that because one of us has several graduate degrees and the other of us married the girl with a graduate degree. So that's where that worked out. So she's going to come on with us and talk all about that. But first, we're going to talk about some market stuff and tell you what's going on in the market. Not a whole lot of change over the last couple of weeks, but I do want to call your attention to a couple of things that are going on. Most importantly is there's a report that was out that kind of tells you everything you need to know, because while I enjoy it, especially during an election season, hearing about how strong the economy is, there are certain segments, what's happened in the current economy is there are certain segments of the economy that are in recession. They just are. I mean, it may not be a recession economy-wide, and that's a good thing. We'd like to avoid that, of course, but there are certain segments that are just in a recession. It's just this weird coming out of COVID, coming out of the quarantining kind of stuff. And one of those is real estate. And that has to do with the interest rate and a lot of other things, the lock-in effect, because so many people have interest rates that are below 5%, below 4%. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes into this stew. But really the reality is the real estate market is in a recession. It just is. Now, not in prices. Prices are more or less stable. They're coming down a little bit. And interest rates are coming down a bit. But really what we're looking at is we've got a problem with just the volume. There's not as much real estate changing hands. And because houses aren't being sold and houses aren't coming on the market and people aren't buying them and all the stuff in between, it's just sort of a frozen market. So there's a good report we talked about last time around, but I want to bring it to your attention again. A new report, the title was, "A New Report Illustrates Just How Stuck the Housing Market Is." And this was on CNN. According to these guys, and I think they're completely correct, just 2.5% of homes in the U.S. changed hands this last year in the first 8 months. That's the lowest turnover rate in the last 30 years. Whatever industry you're in, whatever you do for a living, somebody tells you that your industry is in the worst shape, it's got the least amount of sales in the last 30 years, that ought to tell you something. And by the way, when they say 30 years, that's only because that's when they started charting this particular number. I suspect it actually goes longer than that. The latest data from the real estate brokerage Redfin underscores how much housing market has stalled in 2004 as America has faced toxic combination of record high home prices and elevated mortgage rates, creating one of the most unaffordable markets in a generation. What this data tells us is that the housing market in 2024 has been really frozen. That's according to Redfin's head economist, Chen Zhao, who tends to be right about these things a lot. We said the same thing in 2023, and I think this was the expectation that it couldn't get any worse, but 2024 has been a disappointing housing market. It's putting it mildly. About 25 in every 1,000 homes that were sold between January and August. That means 37% fewer homes were sold between January and August this year than during the same period in 2021, and 31% fewer homes than the same period in 2019. So we're off by a lot. I don't know, whatever industry you're in, if you do 30% less of it, you're going to have a problem. That is a recession. 30% less, what if you're selling widgets, or you're selling cars, or you're selling ice cream? 30% less is going to be a recession. Just is. Of course, it's one of the main reasons that fewer people are buying homes now is that there are fewer homes for sale. Just 32 out of every 1,000 homes were listed for sale in the first 8 months of this year. That number should be closer to 40 or 50 out of 1,000 rather than 32. The first months of the year, the lowest level since at least 2012, and that's because that was the earliest year they started taking those notes. Started collecting that data. So that's what's going on. The real estate market is kind of frozen up. It's just not moving a whole heck of a lot. There is stuff out there. There are still buyers. There are still sellers. But the reality is, if you got a house to sell right now, it better be a deal because buyers know they got more choice. We're going to talk about that as well. Let's talk about mortgage rates. Mortgage rates have risen to 6.44. They came down 2 weeks ago, which is great when the Fed dropped the rate. Came down to just about 6%, and now they've gone up twice in the last 2 weeks. Mortgage rates rose to 6.32% last week to rose from 6.32% last week to 6.44% this week for a 30-year fixed home loan for the week ending October 17th, according to Freddie Mac. The 30-year fixed-rate mortgage increased for the third consecutive week, moving closer to 6.5%, according to Freddie Mac's chief economist, Sam Cater. In general, higher rates reflect the strength of the economy that is supportive of the housing market, which I don't agree with, but that's the sort of thing you say when you're work for Freddie Mac and you're the chief economist. But notably, as compared to a year ago, the rates are more than 1% lower. I want to have this guy on speed dial. I want him to tell me, no matter what I do, I want him to tell me the bright side of it, because I think it would be wonderful. Because you're telling me that interest rates are lower than they were a year ago, but yet they've gone up nearly half a point in the last 2 weeks. Yeah, I guess that's shiny because it's not what it was a year ago, but again, it's gone up a half a point in the last 2 weeks. And we needed that relief desperately, and now it's gone back up. Market factors. According to the same economist, according to Sam Cater, the Freddie Mac's chief economist, while we expect the long-run trend in mortgage rates to be downward, recent weeks have brought volatility. Okay. I don't know about volatility. I know the rates are going up, which is an indicator that more people are coming into the market and more people are getting loans, which is good. Anyway, many people expected mortgage rates to take a major nosedive after the Federal Reserve cut interest rates last month for the first time since 2020, but that drastic free fall hasn't materialized, which those of you guys who listen to the show, those of you who are clients of mine, I told you it wasn't going to be a free fall. I told you the Fed was going to lower the rates, and I also told you that the mortgage industry had already kind of gotten there on its own because they were anticipating the drop in the rates. Anyway, mortgages may be a constant roller coaster ride of late, as yet home prices remain stagnant. And this is the part I want you guys to pay the most attention to. A recent survey by Realtor.com found that the median home prices for homes nationally have fallen 1% in October this year compared to October of 2023. Now, 1% is not a lot, but when you figure the average home is about 800,000, 900,000 in our area, that's $8 or $9 grand, which again, in housing terms, is not a whole heck of a lot. But at the end of the day, the fact that it's fallen at all, and these are national numbers, this isn't local, California hasn't had this quite yet, is remarkable because it hasn't fallen up until now. So finally the recession is beginning, the real estate recession as we call it, is beginning to affect housing prices. Now again, I don't think housing prices are going to tumble, but they are going to correct. And what happens when a housing market goes flat, when it's been going up for as long as it has, value of property that is, when it goes flat, it feels like a fall. Everyone acts like it's falling. But the reality is, it's just not. It's stabilizing, and that's really what it needs to do. And frankly, wouldn't be the worst thing if it did come down a couple of percentage points. Interestingly, and I found this fascinating, the cost per square foot of listed single-family homes nationally has increased by 2.3% because more smaller homes are being listed for sale. So it tends these days to be smaller homes that are selling, not bigger homes, which has caused this price per square foot number to skyrocket, even though the overall number of listings for listings on the market, the overall average for listings, has come down 1%. One of the worst hit areas in the country right now is San Francisco, seeing a yearly average listing value decline of 8.9%. That's not 1%, that's 8.9. And the reason I point out San Francisco is because San Francisco, what happens there will happen here. We tend to run about 6 months behind, economically speaking, in real estate, behind areas like San Francisco. But we're looking at a correction here as well. So that is kind of where we're at. And there's one other thing. There was also a drop in the mortgage rate, which is great, but it didn't really bring buyers back to the market. And I wanted to talk to you guys about builder confidence real quickly because that's another big indicator. Building confidence, these are home builders, single-family home builders. Building confidence rose in October as they expect mortgage rates to fall and home buying conditions to improve in the coming months. In other words, the builders have decided, or they think anyway, when they survey all the builders nationally, they are very rosy about the market. They had a score of 40 when they had this conversation with them last month. Now it's 43. It just means that they're more optimistic about it. Builders think they're going to be selling more houses in the future, and they're going to be selling them easier for more money. Having said that, the average price cut in October for new houses across the country was 6%. So new housing costs have fallen 6% in the last month, which is up from 5% the previous month. So new housing builders are cutting prices to get housing sold. Again, not as much in Southern California, but in other parts of the country, they're seeing 10 and 12% drops. New housing builders in Austin right now are dying. They'll sell houses much, much cheaper than they predicted. So you have builders more optimistic, but yet they're still cutting prices. You have a lot of houses. Inventory is starting to return to the market, but not nearly where it needs to be because so many people have really low interest rates. And interest rates are bounced up to 6.5 again, or almost 6.5 again, and that's slowed down buying again. So you've got this really kind of bad soup. And what the bottom line to all of this is people are not buying homes as briskly as they used to a few years ago. High home prices and mortgage rates weigh on how much they can afford. The affordability problem will persist in until wage and job growth catches up. It will likely take several years before we see a stable, normal real estate market. So for the next 3 or 4 years, we're in for a heck of a ride. We just are. Right now, if you have a house to sell, it needs to be a deal or you're in for a longer wait than usual. That's just the reality. If there are 3 houses on your block when they're for sale, when there used to only be 1 or 2, that's increased competition. There's increased competition. If demand remains constant, and demand has not gone up, we hoped it would. I should say demand has not gone up appreciably. We hoped it would with the drop in the interest rate, but as that's balanced out now, we're back to kind of where we were. So if demand remains constant and supply goes up, prices fall. That's basic economic theory, and that's what we're going to be looking at here in the very, very near future. Prices are going to start to fall. If you got a house to sell, it better be a deal, or you're going to be looking at it for a while. So even though, and this is really the big takeaway, buyers know right now that the longer you wait, the more options you're going to have because more inventory is returning to the market, and the lower the interest rate is likely to be because the interest rate, although it's spiked over the last 2 weeks, is going to come down. And now I'm going to say, I was saying the Fed's only going to lower it one more time, probably in their December meeting, but I think they're going to lower it 2 more times now before the end of the year because of the spike we've seen that the market kind of got to on its own. So bottom line, if you got a house to sell, better be a deal. If it's not a deal, no, it doesn't have to be a deal price-wise necessarily. Maybe it's a deal because you're the only one who's got the really nice kitchen on the block. Maybe you're the only one who's got a view. Maybe you're just the nicest house in the area, whatever that is, but yours has to stand out or it's not going to sell. That is just the reality. If you're a buyer, and this is why your house has to be a deal, because you got to motivate people. If you're a buyer, you know that sitting on the fence actually helps you. Might help you, and you can't sit too long because things will change just as quickly. But right now, buyers know, and they should know, that interest rates are coming down over time. They also know that prices are going to start coming down over time. And more importantly, most importantly, they know there are going to be more options. So that FOMO, that fear of missing out because I saw this house and it was so great and it wasn't perfect, but I got to buy, that's not really taking place in the market right now. A buyer who is not 100% sure goes, well, I'm not 100% sure. I think I'm going to back out. That's why there's been a record number of escrows falling apart as well. You see headlines about that all over the place. So tough times in the real estate market for those of us who work in it. But if you're a seller, make it a deal. Adjust your expectations. If you're a buyer, take your time, pick your shot. And when you see the right house, take a shot at it. And if it doesn't work, there'll be another one tomorrow. But just take your time. And unfortunately, that's the advice I have to give. And those two things are in direct contradiction with each other. We're in representing a seller. You want to get it as quickly as possible for as much money as possible. You're representing a buyer. You want it done for as little money as possible. Those two ideas are contradictory. But I'm telling you, if you're a buyer, hang tight. Wait to find the perfect thing. There's no rush. Now, your life may cause something you need to get going. You go job relocation. You got to do something else. But as far as the market's concerned, I think prices are going to adjust a little bit. They're going to stay flat, maybe come down a little bit over time. And I think the interest rate's going to come down. I know the interest rate's going to come down over time. And if you're a seller, and I keep saying this over and over again, I've been saying this to all my clients as well, got to be a deal. Got to find a way to stand out. Because if you're not that, you're not moving the house. So that's kind of where the market's at. Now, before we go to break, there's one other thing I want to touch on with you guys, because whenever I run across a scam, I like to talk to you guys about it, because the only way to stop these dang things is to know about them. So here's the latest one. I got about 5 or 6 calls about this in the last 2 weeks. There's a company going around that works under different names, but here's how the scam works. They call you up and they say, we see that your house is a short sale, it's in foreclosure, there's an NOD, whatever's going on. They find the issue, and they say, we will offer to take the house off your hands. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to offer you $2,500 for you to sign over the deed to the house and the power of attorney, a power of attorney for the house. So you're going to give us all the rights as if we own the house for $2,500. Sometimes they'll go to $5,000. And then this is the scam, we will go negotiate our own short sale. And the problem with that theory is that, first of all, you should never be signing, even if you are in foreclosure, you shouldn't be signing over the deed to your house. That is only going to cause you more trouble. And you certainly shouldn't be signing over to strangers because they gave you $2,500. The scam is they pick up the house, they work their own short sale, whatever that means, and then they quote-unquote sell the opportunity. They sell a contract. They never actually own the house, except you've given them title, so they do. This is a horrendously bad idea. And they sell it as, we need title to the house, and we need power of attorney because we need to be able to talk to the bank directly. That is a load of garbage. That is completely and totally untrue. I've been doing short sales for over 30 years. I pioneered the field. I'm telling you, all you need is an authorization. Written authorization from the client. You do not need title to the home. Please hear me when I say this. It does not require title to the property to negotiate a short sale. It is your home. The only way you get to decide what happens with it is if you remain on title. And giving away the title to your house for $2,500, even if it's a house that's underwater, which is rare because it'd be a short sale, is insane. It is insane, it is bad, it is dangerous, and it will absolutely create liability for you, and you will regret it. We'll talk about this some more in the weeks to come because I'm sure this scam isn't going away, but this is the latest and greatest, and it is a scam and it is wrong. Don't give away the title to your house. Just don't. I mean, it's nonsense. You don't sell a cow for a thing of beans. Just nonsense. If you have questions about that or anything I've talked about today, please give me a call. You can reach me at my cell, 661-714-1400. That is my personal cell phone. Call me on it, text me on it anytime. I promise I will call you back, discuss these things. But let's go to break. Let's hear from some of our advertisers. And when we come back, we'll have Jane on. We'll talk all about attorney stuff. Got a lot of good questions for her. Should be a lot of fun. Should learn a lot of good stuff today. Answer some questions for folks. I'm Rich Szerman. This is The Fix with Rich on KHTS, AM 1220, FM 98.1, your hometown station. Thank you guys for listening. Stay through the break, and we'll be back. You've reached the Real Estate Fix. I'm your host, Rich Szerman, on KHTS 98.1 FM, AM 1220, your hometown station. Thank you guys for listening. Oh, I'm going to enjoy this today. I hope you guys are going to enjoy it too. In studio today, we have as a special guest my lovely wife, Jane Szerman, who is a real estate attorney of renown. She's been a practicing attorney for a while.
A few years.
A very long time. Well, when she started, the law was just on tablets, and you had to have it chiseled in order to do stuff with them. Now there's word processors. And
filing, very difficult.
Yeah, it's much better. Harder to file a tablet. But no, she's fantastic. She has a law degree. She has her MBA. I'm, of course, biased about this because, well, I don't know why she agreed to marry me. You can come up with your own theory there. But thank you, by the way, for doing that. It was very nice of you to do that. Thank you. But she is extraordinary, and she's the person I go to. She's the person our clients go to whenever we have questions. And so rather than me asking her these questions and then telling you what she told me, I thought it would be more fun just to have her on the air today, which took a little bit of doing. I had to bribe her, so she doesn't enjoy this quite as much as I do. But she has come on today and has agreed to do this with us. So let's ask her some questions. Ready?
Sure.
Ready? Okay, first one. As a seasoned, we get this all the time. As a seasoned real estate attorney, what question do you get most often? Which is kind of a cheesy way to ask you a question, but we'll start with that.
Well, I could give you some basic answer. I do get a lot of questions about landlord-tenant laws because people are tenants and they rent places. And
it's also changed a lot in the last couple of years.
Yeah, there have been a lot of changes for sure, and a lot of conflict now especially. That's not just in politics. It's kind of everywhere. There's a lot of conflict. I think I see more of it now than I've really ever seen before. But on a larger scale, the problem is I get questions that are too late to do the most good. I can help. Attorneys can help after there's a conflict. There are things to be done to resolve things, but the thing people don't do that put themselves in that situation is they don't put a contract in writing, they don't put agreements in writing, and they don't protect themselves with inspections and getting everything set ahead of time the way they should. So that would be my biggest mistake, or the biggest mistake people make that I talk to them about, is that they didn't do it right up front and they're having to try to fix it later. Fixing it is always worse.
Well, let me interject here for a second. Anything you do in real estate, there is no such thing as verbal real estate.
Nope.
It does not exist. The only agreement, this is the only one in California that you're allowed to have that has to do with real estate that can be a verbal agreement, correct me if I'm wrong, is an agreement between realtors to split a commission. That is the only agreement you're allowed to have that doesn't have to be in writing. And by the way, that agreement should be in writing too. You're out of your mind if you don't do that agreement in writing as well. So, But the point here is I'm trying to drive home is everything in real estate should be in writing.
Absolutely.
How many times have you heard, but we talked about it, we agreed, did you? Where'd you write it down? Well, no, we just talked about it. I have a text. At least a text is something. But
yeah, the problem is if you don't have something in writing, if your family is renting a property from a nice little old lady for many years and you don't have anything in writing, you don't have a lease. Now, in that case, that's probably more of a problem for the landlord and the property owner, but that's also a problem for the tenant because they can fix that. If you own a property, but your in-law helped you qualify and so therefore they're on title, you don't own a property. The reality is, unless it's in writing, it doesn't exist. Just treat everything that way in real estate. Make sure everything is done up front, and that'll prevent a lot of problems.
Well, there's your first big piece of advice, audience. Yeah, if you're going to do something in real, I'd say anything, but if you're certainly going to do anything in real estate, if it's not in writing, it doesn't count. If you don't put it in writing and both parties sign it, then it's as if it doesn't exist. Even an agreement between the parties is simple. You can knock something on a word processor and everybody sign it and you're good.
Something is better than nothing.
Yeah.
Don't not do it because it's not going to be perfect and an attorney isn't going to write it up or you're not exactly sure. Just at least write down the parts that you know.
Yeah.
That's still going to be better than nothing.
Well, the other one I know you get all the time is, I can't afford an attorney. You can make a phone call. You can ask. Most attorneys will answer a basic question for you without charging you. I mean, I know it's a relatively mercenary business,
well,
but
not too detailed. But yeah, you can get the information.
Also, the internet is your pal. It gives you a lot of very bad information as well. But you can usually sort the bad from the good. You can usually do a little bit of research.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look up, do I need? Well, we'll actually talk about this in the questions. But if you look up, do I need an attorney to do a lease? The answer is no. But you might want to have one review it. It's a good idea.
Yeah, there's a big difference between are you required to do something by law and is it a really good idea if you do this thing.
So there's your first tip from a real estate attorney. Do everything in writing. Everything should be in writing. If you guys agree that it's a sunny day, somebody ought to write down it's a sunny day and you ought to sign it. That's just the way it goes. Let's move on to the next one. Kind of ties into this. When do I need a realtor or real estate attorney? In California, are you required to have a real estate attorney or agent?
Well, this is one of those questions, like I was just saying. You are not required to have a real estate agent, but I absolutely think you'd be crazy not to have a real estate agent in a transaction. You don't need a real estate attorney up front in a standard transaction, but I would say if anything starts to go a little questionable, or if it's particularly complicated or outside the norm in any way, talk to the realtor, but the realtor is most likely going to recommend that you get an attorney to review the contract as well.
So in other words, if you're going to buy or sell a property, it's a good idea to have a realtor with an attorney on call.
Yes.
Basically where you want to be. Okay, fair
Yes.
enough. Well, we do that. Lots of people do that. Actually, most of the companies in town, well, they're not as good as you, obviously, but most of the companies in town will have some sort of counsel of some sort that you can talk to if you need to.
Well, there are two types. The firm will have an attorney, but that attorney works for the company and is looking out for the company's best interests.
That's true.
So that is not necessarily a person that I would rely on for your own independent advice. Now, they do have, as you know, some companies and some realtors have separate policies for E&O and things that do allow the clients to access an attorney for advice, but typically the clients are paying for that. So you should know about that going in, that you've paid for an additional policy for that.
Just so you guys know, is errors and omissions. That's the one thing realtors and all really professionals, attorneys as well, always worried about. So you always have to have, to a realtor, errors and omissions is kind of, it's not the same. It's very similar to an attorney having malpractice insurance.
Yeah.
It's really kind of what it's for more than anything else. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So a realtor who works for an attorney who works for a real estate firm is going to have the firm's needs in mind and not necessarily yours. Now, hopefully, those should be in line. Your desires, what you need as a buyer or a seller of real estate, or manager or anything else, should be in line with the realtor and the real estate company you're working with. They should coincide. There shouldn't be a whole lot of daylight between what you need and what the realtor and the real estate company needs. But that is a fair point that an independent attorney is very different than one who works for the company.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's. Oh, this is my favorite one. We've been laughing about this one. This is one of the questions I told her ahead of time because I just love that I get this question a lot. Who do real estate laws in California apply to? Now, before you answer, I specifically want to tell you guys, if you work for PHH, this answer is for you. If you work for PHH Mortgage, they're a mortgage company, they're a servicer. They're not a bank, they're a servicer. We like to call them non-banks because it makes them angry, and I enjoy making them angry because they're awful people. So if you work for PHH, please take heed of this answer, and I'll tell you why as soon as Jane gives you the answer. So, who do real estate laws in California apply to?
Well, they apply to everybody.
Okay.
And every company that does business in California is subject to those laws.
So hypothetically, because you told me I have to do it this way, hypothetically, if a really unscrupulous bank that was populated by people who have no idea what they're doing and care less, who are simply cashing a paycheck until they get fired because McDonald's wasn't hiring, because honestly, if you could master the phrase, would you like fries with that, you're better off working for Burger King than PHH in most cases. It's less corrosive to the soul. Poisoning people, I guess, with French fries is probably better than taking their homes away from them. Anyway, I'm not a fan, as you guys might know. We used to do a segment on the show called Bad Bank of the Week, but PHH wanted that segment so many times, we just retired it. It wasn't a funny bit anymore. It was always PHH. They have a couple of other contenders for the crown, but it's always PHH. Anyway, so let's say you worked for an awful bank, and we were to quote the law, or an attorney were to quote this code section, the actual law to you. It would be inappropriate for that bank to say, we don't have that here.
It wouldn't make any sense because
the law
they're doing business in California.
Yeah.
Therefore, they are subject to the laws of California. Not the laws in the state they're from or the country or the whatever magical land they live in, but in the state where the property is located, which here is California.
So you might say it might be fair if you had somebody who was really passionate about saving your house from foreclosure, and because it's where you and your kids live. And you have every right to save the house, and you should qualify to be able to do this for a modification. And if an unscrupulous bank were to say something, again, hypothetically, like we don't have that law here, it might not be appropriate exactly, but maybe warranted for the foreclosure defense person in that case to refer to the person who said that as a moron. Hypothetically speaking.
Hypothetically, of course. I mean, the good news there is that in my experience in those situations, once an experienced realtor or an attorney or somebody gets involved, with that company and you escalate it to a manager or the vice president's office or whoever it is
Legal
in the chain of
department.
command, legal department sometimes, although usually that's a last resort, they do understand that, and they won't tell you, but they'll begrudgingly acknowledge, within the company and on the file that it does apply. But you have to have somebody who knows that representing you. For these poor people,
You have to
I
get
feel
that.
bad for them trying to navigate this by themselves, and the bank says, no, we don't do that. And they have to go, oh, okay.
Well,
And
that
then
was
they lose.
yeah, that was always the question. How many times has that particular person at that particular bank said the same thing to somebody whose rights were being trampled upon, and because they didn't know how to fight back, they went, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, that's a big piece of advice I would give in general is do not listen to the person on the other side of whatever this is telling you how it is.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're lying. I'm not saying they're a bad person. I'm not saying you shouldn't trust them necessarily, but verify. Go get the information verified yourself so that you know what your rights are and you know what's required of you and the other party.
While I appreciate your answer very much, I'm going to contradict you a little bit, because if you're talking about a bank in the United States, especially a mortgage servicer, again, maybe like PHH, although there are others, they do lie, they are incompetent, they do not have their best interest, and they will absolutely lie, cheat, and steal. They're horrible people. They are cartoon villains.
Well,
So
see,
yes,
this is,
I will agree with your point, though. You should not listen to them. I'm just not as nice about it as you are.
well, the end result is the same, which is my point. You don't have to create an antagonistic relationship. They do, but that's different. But you do need to protect yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very valid point. So who do these laws apply to? My goodness. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Do California laws for selling a home require an escrow agent? There's a great debate about this in my house.
Well, this is another one of, this is another one of those questions that there's nothing in the law that requires an escrow company and a certified escrow officer to be involved with the transaction. But again, you would be kind of crazy not to, in part because they will make sure the documents are done correctly. They will provide a method for recording the documents as needed, and they will be a neutral third party to hold on to things, because in some cases nobody wants to go first. Nobody wants to sign first or give money first. In this case, you have a neutral third party to hold all the stuff and manage it.
Yeah, for those of you guys who have never been through this process, I suspect most of you have if you've ever bought or sold a home or you've had friends who have. Escrow is the hub of the wheel. Escrow is where everybody puts in the contracts, everybody puts in their money. They're the neutral third party. They're the one in the middle.
Now,
They're
that
the hub of the wheel that
is
makes it go around.
specific to California and
Sure.
some other states, but I do know that back east, if you have a relative or somebody you know, or maybe you yourself have gone through a transaction previously on the East Coast, it's done very differently than here. So
They use attorneys as closing agents.
yeah,
Go to the table.
it's a very different role.
Yeah.
So that's different. So what I'm
Similar
saying here
process.
is fairly specific to
Yeah.
California.
It is a similar process, but it's different characters. But it's
Yeah.
very, very similar process. Okay, must a title search be conducted?
Well, again, it's not required, but it would be a big mistake not to, and that's tied into using an escrow company as well, because typically it's title and escrow. Escrow will coordinate with the title company. The title company will run a title search of the history of the property and determine if there are any problems. And it can be kind of a pain because they get very weirdly nitpicky about some things.
An insurance company. Title companies are insurance companies.
And they don't want to pay out. They want to
Their
make it
job
as
is to
difficult
limit
as possible.
liability. They
I
could
get
care
that.
less whether the property sells or doesn't sell. Their job is to limit their
But
liability.
that is to the buyer's benefit down the road, because if I've seen transactions where somebody quit claims a property to somebody else and they do things sort of informally, and maybe that's not a problem and you get title and it's fine, but when you go to
never be fine.
sell it, well, I mean, it's fine for you, but when you go to sell it, you're going to create problems where title won't insure it if there's some issue there. Say the person who quit claimed it to you is deceased or can't be found or lost their memory and wants more money from you, because title company is going to require that they sign an affidavit.
Those are all true stories, by the way, for those of you listening. Well, because, title companies are essentially insurance companies. They insure the chain of title, and they're most concerned about liability. And here's the thing. If you transfer title without getting a title policy, which you should get through an escrow company, but you can also go to title directly. But either way, if you do not get a title policy, if you do not get title insurance, you create what's called a cloud on title, which means no other title insurance company is going to insure it until it's sorted out. If you can't get title insurance, nobody can get a loan. You can't get a refi. You can still transfer the property, but it becomes a property that is untethered. It's a real problem. We see these a lot in our office. We get a lot of clouds on title stuff.
I would say in recent years as well, there has been a huge increase in the amount of fraud and the amount of difficulty the title companies give to even a standard transaction. They'll make you go back to 2 transactions ago and get a certificate of trust from the trustee of a trust that transferred the property years ago because they didn't have some additional paperwork there in their file. Nothing was wrong with the transaction and title insurance was there. So they're going back through transactions and just tightening it up like crazy now because there was this big influx of fraudulent transactions largely during the pandemic.
Well, again, why it's handy to have an attorney around, because we've had situations where a title company wouldn't agree to do something because their take on the law was just incorrect. And you've gotten in there and said, that's not how this trust works. That's not how this document works. Here's the code section. If I'm wrong, tell me, we'll change it. But that's not how this works. And the title company will usually back off when you present them with facts, because then it goes to the legal department and they go, okay, Jane was right.
Yeah, no, they usually know what they're doing. And to be honest with you,
well, usually need to get to that point inside the company to find the one who knows what they're doing, but they do eventually.
My experience with title officers and escrow officers is that they usually know. And more importantly, if you can get them what they've asked for, that is your path of least resistance. Even if you don't think it's really necessary,
well, if you can,
honestly, just do it. That's what I do.
Yeah,
but there are times when that doesn't necessarily make sense and you need to know the difference. And that may be a time you need to get an attorney involved to let you know.
Well, it's also, I don't want to talk about, you guys remember before the break, I was telling you about that scam that's going around where these guys want to buy your title for $2,500 and they get a power of attorney to the house.
Lord.
And then they do that. Yeah. This is why that is a bad idea. And also, I didn't discuss that part. It creates a cloud on title. You shouldn't do it for that reason as well. It's just that's just scam is just bugging the heck.
Well, I should point out a big problem there is that if you do transfer title, it's not the title the bank cares about. It's the loan, and the loan stays in the owner's name. So you've now split the asset from the debt, which
also can create a due on sale clause. And if you weren't in foreclosure, you could be then. Yeah. There's all kinds of stuff. Don't do that. It's just a bad idea. Yeah. Let's see. Let's move on to the next one. This is a good tax question. Is a transfer tax imposed when you sell or buy real property?
Sure. Municipalities will have transfer taxes.
Every county in California.
Yeah, there's always something.
There's usually a county transfer tax, and depending where you are, you may have a city transfer tax as well. It's just one of the things that funds municipalities. They've been taxing them since the dawn of the century.
And recording fees as well.
Yeah,
so
it's paperwork fees. It just is. And in California, they get pretty pricey. So yes, there absolutely is.
Yeah, and fraud reasons, they've increased and there's a lot higher standards for recording things, which is good though. It used to be you could just record things without an ID or anything. And then there was this mysterious document on title. So I would say a lot of them are good because they're tightening up who can record documents and they're being more formal about it, which isn't bad.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I tell you what, before we get into, because my next group of questions have to do with disclosure stuff, which is a lot of fun. Before we go into that, I think, is it okay to we'll go to commercial a little early? We'll go to commercial a little early if you guys like. Because when we come back, I want to talk to you guys about, this is one of my favorite topics. We've been talking about this the last couple of days since Jane agreed to come on the show this week, about disclosure stuff. Because disclosure stuff is usually where you need an attorney more than anything else. Failure to disclose. Most lawsuits in California, correct me if you think I'm wrong, most lawsuits in California are failure to disclose. Yeah. Most real estate lawsuits, as you say, between buyer and seller. Yeah. Failure to disclose. So let's listen to some more of our sponsors. We love hearing from our sponsors, so please support them. Supports the show. Appreciate it. And when we come back, we're going to talk to Jane about disclosure stuff, because this is where the rubber meets the road. So please listen to the break and come back. I'm your host, Rich Szerman, on the Real Estate Fix on KHTS 98.1 FM, AM 1220, your hometown station. Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening to the break. Thank you for coming back. I'm your host, Rich Szerman, on the Real Estate Fix with Rich. That's actually technically the name, the Real Estate Fix with Rich, because I like to put my name in things. Anyway, thank you guys for coming back. I appreciate it. We're very lucky today. I'm very lucky today because my wife is joining us in the booth here today talking. She's a real estate attorney. Has been for many, many years, very experienced real estate attorney. And in addition to being better looking, she's also smarter than I am. So was good enough to come in today to talk to us about a lot of the questions we get, the legal questions I get all the time as a result of the show and as a result of my real estate practice, and some from hers as well. But we were just going to go over disclosure stuff because the majority of lawsuits in California, real estate lawsuits in California, tend to be about disclosure issues.
Yep.
I think the bottom line, I'll say this quickly, is that if you are selling a house, disclose. If you say, should I disclose this? The answer is yes.
Yeah, you stole my
recommendation. If you ask the question, well, stupid. I listen. If you ask I want to seem smart. That's how I do it. I repeat what you say, and I seem more intelligent. That's how this works.
All right.
You're not new here. Anyway, if you have to ask the question, should I disclose? The answer is yes. Having said that, let's move on. Okay. Is there a real estate disclosure law in California?
There are many real estate disclosure laws in California.
Rather
Whole ton
specific
of them.
ones. Must the seller disclose information about the physical condition of the home?
Well, that's the basic disclosure. I mean, the basic disclosure is the seller has to tell the buyer anything they know about the property or reasonably should know.
That's the bugaboo.
That is a bit of an issue. And sometimes it's not even intentional. I think, unfortunately, somebody lives in a property for a long time and they sometimes forget about stuff. So there is still the requirement that the buyer protect themselves and they have inspections and they have people look at the property. But ultimately, the seller has to disclose anything they know about the property, which does get a little more complicated when it's a rental property.
Sure.
I've seen a number of situations where an owner of a property, because it was a rental, claims to not know anything about the property.
Yeah,
but then you find later there is a repair bill for a sewer line or for, the pool that the seller paid for previously. So they obviously knew about it, even if they weren't living there. So then you have to get into what they should have known and we're proving that they knew it, and that's definitely a place where there's a lot of litigation. Yeah.
Which leads me nicely into our next question. Do sellers have to pass on any previous inspection reports, bids, or issues with the property? Anything they've got in writing?
Well, as with everything with me, the answer is not simple. It's not yes or no, because the answer is a qualified no. You don't have to pass on the reports, but you do have to pass on the information that you have learned about it. So, therefore, practically speaking, the easiest way to do that, the best way, is to give the reports.
So when you say no, what you mean is yes?
It's not legally required, but they have to provide the information in it.
So what you're saying is I'm coming dangerously close to winning an argument with you. Because I was
That
losing
is
this argument
not
all day
possible.
yesterday, but I noticed
So-
you've moderated a bit on the air here, so we should have all of our conversations on air from now on. It works for me. Feel like I got an edge. Anyway, yes, the answer is yes. If you have a physical inspection that was previously done on the property within, I think it's 6 months or a year. I would even say 2 years, but certainly within a year, certainly within 6 months. I think then the real estate contract says 6 months. You have to pass it on. You cannot withhold it.
The reality is, once you've had an inspection done, the seller then knows everything, whether they, and this is, some sellers will say, oh, well, I didn't notice that or I didn't realize. But if it's in a report, which is actually the best place for a buyer to be, which is when it's in a written report somewhere.
By a licensed contractor.
By a licensed contractor. The seller can't say they don't know because it's right there and it was their report previously. So it would be completely irresponsible not to provide those reports to a subsequent buyer, although we have both seen situations where that doesn't happen, and then you find out later there was a previous report that showed the problem, like with termite. I think I remember one.
Yeah.
They got a termite report that showed that there was infestation and work needed to be done. They didn't like that report, so they went and hired a different company who was probably a little more lax about their inspection and got clear termite and then used that in the transaction. And that came back.
You need to pass on both reports and say, we don't like this first company. We didn't agree with them. We got a second company. Here's what they said. And if you're a buyer in that circumstance, the smart move is to get a third opinion. I mean, it's annoying. It's expensive, but you need to have your. It doesn't happen that much. But if somebody is going contractor shopping, whether it's physical inspection, termite, or any pool, anything else, they're going contractor shopping to find that report that they like. They have to give up the old reports as well. You just do.
I just had a client who they were in an escrow to buy a property, and there was a conflict, and they weren't able to buy that property, so they were purchasing another property that had also previously been in escrow and had inspections done. And the client called me and was very excited because that could be thousands of dollars for some of these reports. It was a property out in Agua Dulce, so
rural
it's more
property.
Rural, right?
Yeah,
so
wells and things.
well inspections, right? All of that stuff. So they were very excited to save the money on that. I was like, that's great, and I definitely, think you should review them and make sure you know. However, you are going to want to get updated reports. Perhaps, if this was a couple months ago, maybe we're certain getting more inspections, and sure enough, a couple of things showed up
that weren't on the previous inspection.
Yeah,
Isn't that always the way?
Suddenly is a problem, but now they know about it.
Isn't that always the way? Okay, so the short answer For those of us
See,
who
I
didn't
warned
go to
you.
law
No-
school,
no short
the
answers.
short answer is if you have a previous inspection report, you need to pass it on. And if you're a buyer and the seller has a previous inspection report, they need to provide it to you.
You need to ask for it.
It's
yeah.
also in the real estate contract says they have to do that. Okay, well, can a
Well,
buyer...
that's the other thing, remember. You do, in any case, I'm speaking generally about the law, but also in California, pretty much everybody uses the standard contract, which was drafted by attorneys with the California Association of Realtors. Yeah, there are committees of attorneys, a ridiculous number of attorneys. So that is the contract everybody uses, pretty much, with some exceptions around the state. So always look back to the contract, because that will control.
Yeah, again, it has to be in writing. That's the point. Okay, I'm going to whip through a few of these because I think they're funny. Can a buyer sue for fraudulent misrepresentation?
Well,
That's the point.
Yes, if fraud has occurred.
Yes.
Yes.
If a house is damaged during the escrow period, what is the buyer's position? What does the seller have to do?
Well,
let me give you a specific. You're in escrow and the house is struck by a meteor and it destroys the house. I got a lot of imagination. Destroys the house.
Mm-hmm.
What happens next?
Well, I would collect that meteorite because I like meteorites. They're very cool. Anyway.
It's not a rock question. It's a law question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a standard issue of something called risk of loss. When does that risk pass to the buyer? And the California contract is pretty clear on that it needs to be given to the buyer at the close of escrow in the same condition it was in when the contract was entered into. So if a meteor destroyed the house is going to have to be rebuilt.
Yeah, in other words, the seller's insurance would hopefully...
By then, the buyers may well be, canceling.
But the seller would, technically speaking, the seller would have to go, they'd go to their insurance, but they would have to supply the property in the same condition, materially the same condition as it was when they first made the offer.
Yeah.
Okay.
True.
Okay, I'm going to just go through the last of these a little bit. How about if a buyer defaults, can the seller take their deposit? We get that one a lot.
Well, very complex. I mean, there's an issue of liquidated damages in the contract. There's a clause that will address that your realtor should tell you about, so that if it's signed, the buyer's deposit is at risk directly if they breach. But ultimately, if there's a breach, there's still going to be damages that the buyer is going to be responsible for, but they'll have to prove what they are specifically.
Let me put that another way. If the buyer has waived their contingencies and they back out of a deal, yes, you got a good shot at the deposit. If they've not waived their contingencies and they back out of a deal, no, you do not.
Yeah.
I was just making it a little quicker.
Yeah.
Is it possible to sell a house that's in foreclosure?
Of course.
Of course it is. We do it all the time. Is it possible to sell a house in bankruptcy?
Yep.
Do it all the time. Except you got to get the approval of the court, or you got to do it outside the court.
Yeah, in both cases, you just have other people participating.
Okay, this is the last one. We only got 30 seconds left. What is the most important piece of advice you give anyone buying or selling real estate?
Put it in writing.
Yeah, put everything in writing.
Put
Everything must be in writing.
Everything.
I would also suggest hire a competent realtor, interview people, decide who you like, and make sure you have an attorney in the background there if you need them. If you do have any questions of me, if you have any questions you want me to pass along to Jane, please feel free to give me a call. And this, again, my personal cell phone, 661-714-1400. My name is Rich Szerman. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, call me anytime. If you have any questions for Jane, call me, text me, email me, whatever. We're more than happy to get them to her. She'll answer if she can. My name is Rich Szerman. You've been listening to The Real Estate Fix with Rich. My special guest today has been my lovely wife, Jane Szerman. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate it. It was very nice of you. You also look very nice today. Thank you for that as well. So thank you guys for listening. It's been another great week. You guys be good humans. We'll be back in a couple weeks. Thanks.